Welcome, everybody, to this exciting episode of Ask a Pro. My name is David Donahue, and with me is the Director of Strategic Initiatives with the Casita Coalition, Jared Basler. He is also known as the godfather of Granny Flats. He is one of the people that I enjoy having on our webinar the most because we dive deep into the ridiculously minute details and nuances and intended strategy with policy. And we also can
as well as titles and names, because I'm Jared Basler and I'm Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives at Casita. So I thought we just like went over all that, David.
I need cue cards.
you really do at this point. It's all good though. I'm used to it.
Thank you very much, Jared. I appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. We have a lot of people signed up, so I'm excited for those who are going to be here live with us. If you have any questions, just put them into the chat, the Q&A, throw them anywhere. We'll try to get to them as best possible. We do have a full agenda of things that we want to be able to talk about because there is pending legislation. There's active lobbying in Sacramento right now.
Don't use the L word.
Okay, what would you use?
There's active education going on in Sacramento right now.
Air quotes, education. Talking to assembly members and senators on ways to help improve housing or make it more accessible.
Sure. I'm sorry. I didn't know if you were looking at me to say yes or no. I was letting you go through that so I could just say yes. We are educating people across the spectrum at Casita, and that goes from the public to professionals to policymakers, and it is legislation season. Yes.
It is legislation season indeed. So welcome, everybody. If you're joining us live, again, just put the questions into the Q&A. If you're watching this as a recorded video or podcast, there's going to be a place where you can typically put in your questions, and I'll definitely do my best to get back to them. Welcome, Jared, and thank you for agreeing to round two.
Of course. And hi, Rob. It was nice meeting you last night. So
good.
All right, let's get into things.
One of the things we left as this floating sort of revelation or sort of definition for property owners. And this was something that's kind of been debated and talked about, and we teased it out a little bit, is how many ADUs could go on a single family residential lot. Now you have a primary home, and then let's say you can do a detached ADU. So those two dwellings, we got two. But then you can also do a JADU within the existing roof line of the primary house. So that's three. Yes. But then there's an option that if there was, what's that other option that could get you to 4, Jared?
Well, if you're in San Diego, we can get you like 100. And I've seen 100 plus ADUs on lots in San Diego, or at least proposed. Doesn't mean they always get through everything, but anyways, we're not talking about San Diego. We're talking about statewide. So I just like throwing those things out there to just say how much better San Diego is than the rest of the state.
Oh, come on.
And even though we may have our own issues, it does, when I'm have a 30,000 square foot lot in San Diego, I can do 100 ADUs. And when you have a 30,000 square foot lot in LA or the Bay Area, you can do a total of 4 units.
There we go.
Which gets back to your question. So
thank you.
There you go. I'm just working it around to the answer. So
tell us how we can get 4 in the rest of the state, and excluding San Diego.
All right. So subdivision E. And sorry, David, this is going to be something that is going to change very soon. Not what we're talking about, but I almost had 65852.2 tattooed on me. And I'm glad I didn't, because now they're changing the code section. So I'm gonna have to learn a whole new code section for ADUs. And that's a whole other, it doesn't matter at all, but they're just changing the number that it goes into. So currently, if you look up government code 65852.2, and I will drop a link in the chat.
Thank you, please.
This is the government code that applies to ADUs. And so 6.5, look, can I do a quick, I mean, I've already
We got
been
90
here for an
minutes.
hour and a
We got
half.
time.
Can I give you like a 3-minute kind of overview of state
Do
law?
it.
All right. So subdivision A, so little a, is a local agency can adopt an ordinance, and this is what it has to include. Subdivision B, little b, is if you don't have an ordinance, you have to follow everything in subdivision A. If you, you're good. Subdivision C says subdivision C and D are, there he is. I'm just getting to subdivision C is the size requirements. So it kind of sets the maximum sizes outside of A and B. And there's reasons for that. We won't get into it. Subdivision D talks about parking regulations, and you can't have parking for specific ADUs. You can't require parking for specific ADUs. And then subdivision E, which I used to call the nuclear provision, but it's now been labeled by the state as state exemption ADUs. And this is the, forget everything you just read. Subdivision E says what a city has to allow no matter what, whether it's Huntington Beach, Coronado, San Diego, San Jose, it doesn't matter. And subdivision E lays out 4 different types of ADUs. And the key here is that it says that you can do any of these 4. Any of these 4 means any or all, because any does not specify that you only can use one. Well, subdivision E having 4 different types, 2 of them relate to single family, 2 of them relate to multifamily. So obviously there's going to be a division there where I have 2 that relate to single family that can be combined and 2 that relate to multifamily that can be combined. And again, this is not multifamily zoning or single family zoning. State law only cares about what is on the lot. So if there's a single family home on the lot, then you follow the single family portions, and the 2 types of ADUs that you're allowed, either by themselves or as a combination of the 2, is, so you have, this is 658, if you're following along in the link, 65852.2 E1A. E1A says that you can have a ADU that is within, that is a conversion. E1B says that you can have a detached ADU. So you can combine those 2 together. And then E1B also says that you can have, so it says you can have a detached and combine that with a JADU. So for a long time, we all thought that because E1B said you could have a detached and combine it with a JADU, that meant that that was the only combination, and that was how we got to the 3 units total. But because E1 says any, that means you can do E1A and E1B. So E1A says it's a conversion ADU. E1B says you can do a detached ADU, and you can combine that with a junior ADU. So a junior ADU is a conversion. E1A is a conversion as well. And the detached in E1B is your 3rd additional unit, coming up to 4 total.
Thank you for that. So the conversion is applicable to whether you could convert an existing garage. Let's say you have a detached garage.
Yep.
And it could also mean if you, but it, so in a house, and there's a lot of these in Burbank where you have a single family residential primary and you have a detached garage. And so in that situation, a conversion could apply to not only with E1A converting the garage, but then you could, is it E1?
So E1A is you can convert an existing space to an ADU. E1B is you can build a new detached ADU, and you can combine that with a JADU. So yes, if you have a detached garage, convert that detached garage into an ADU under E1A, and then you build an additional detached ADU under E1B, and that also allows you to utilize the JADU rules to convert a portion of the primary, non-accessory structure, but of the primary to a JADU.
When you said
So you get,
yeah, so you just said a non-accessory, so meaning that you can't convert a basement.
no, I'm saying not, it has to be within the footprint of the existing primary.
Yeah, you're not building on additional space, which people
You're not
do.
building on additional space, and typically the way that the state has ruled on this is that you're not converting a detached structure into a JADU.
When you're specifically looking for the JADU exemption,
Yes.
which is separate than a detached or a conversion.
Yes, because the conversion under E1A is that you are converting space within an existing or proposed single family. Again, I don't want to get in the whole proposed thing because that gets real
let's
deep.
leave that off.
So you're converting space within an existing single family dwelling or accessory structure. And because E1A says or accessory structure, that's what gives you the ability to convert that detached garage to a ADU, build a new build a new detached ADU under E1B, which says one detached new construction accessory dwelling unit with 4-foot side and rear setbacks. And then that can E1B detached can be combined with a JADU, which is within the existing primary. So if you have a detached garage, you have the best, like that's the best kind of scenario where you have a detached conversion, a new detached ADU, and a converted portion of the primary dwelling as the JADU.
No, I think that sounds fantastic. And thank you for that explanation. And so that's how you get to your 4. You have 4 dwelling units zoned and approved for continuous habitation. They're all can be CBC compliant or CBC plus whatever, Title 25. There's
remember that a JADU does require owner occupancy. So that is something that people need to remember, is that just because I can get you to 4 doesn't mean that you can do that on investment properties. You have to live there.
Got it. So is everybody, let me just take a quick pause because I'm thank you very much for Frank saying that the chat is disabled. And so I am hoping that can be enabled. So bear with me as I try to post and panelists. Let's see.
And while you're trying to figure out the chat, we will get into state legislation out there right now, like AB 976, that takes care of owner occupancy, but that does not take care of owner occupancy for JADUs. That's only for ADUs.
Right. Yeah.
So I have been able to put stuff in the chat. You have been able to put stuff in the chat. If someone in the audience can put something in the chat so we can see it.
Yeah, if we could kind of test that, that would be great. And if not, thank you very much, Lisa, for asking your question. We will have this recorded version on the aduuniversity.org website. And that is where it will live. So and again, thank you for the call out on the chat feature, and we'll hopefully, if not, drop it into the Q&A. We'll definitely be able to get into that questioning.
And I put the link in the answer to the question about chat being disabled. So
perfect. Got answered. Got it. Show one. Yep, there it is. I see it, Jared. Thank you very much for that. Wow. Okay. So E1A, E1B. This is the part of it as a lot of us who are in the industry need to find and want to understand all of these nuances. And this is a big one. Jared, when you and I kind of were speaking, we had another professional in the conversation, Steve Vallejos with Prefab ADU. Yeah. And one of the conversation topics was, is there going to be any illustration from Casita or HCD that may illustrate this to make this any clearer? Or are they going to try to hold off on that until we get through this next legislative season?
So I think one of the issues right now is at HCD, they're not afraid to make these kinds of interpretations or rulings, but they are also dealing with a lot of stuff as it comes to, with regards to housing elements and other things that they need to take care of. So I'm not actually expecting them to get out things real quickly on some of these interpretations, just because it's when we talk about illustrations, there is potential to get illustrations approved or signed off by HCD, but that won't necessarily encompass all of the kind of scenarios. And so, and we've recently seen this with our updates to, when we did an update to the state law on Casita's website, and we put out a PDF. It's taken months to get them to actually respond to that in a way that, and we're still waiting. Actually, it doesn't mean that they don't agree or they don't have, it's not something they're standing behind. They just have a much higher threshold to be able to get things out to the public.
Okay.
And it's when we work with government agencies, which we all do in some respects, it's something that we you understand how it could take some time. So I would say let's wait until we have some I would say there's some big stuff coming out in the legislature this year that will require more updates from HCD, and I think that we'll have a better chance of getting everything clarified moving forward. So
okay, cool. Thank you for that. Let's dive into some of the really good of some of the juicy topics. Some of the assembly bills that are currently being debated and argued. I think you mentioned there's 4 of them: AB 976, 1033, and 1332, and 434.
Yeah. All right. Where do we want to start?
You pick it.
All right. So there's 2 bills by Assemblymember Ting, and that's AB 1033 and 976. AB 976 is the bill that we have as a standalone bill this year. It was within other bills last year, and it got kind of removed as time went on because it was combined with everything else. We have a clean bill this year to permanently get rid of owner occupancy for ADUs, not JADUs. Being very clear about that. But AB 976 would essentially remove the sunset date, so that
which is coming up next year.
Well, 2025.
Okay, 2025. Okay, year after next.
Yeah. But again, anything that is, people are trying to put through it, it's something to be thinking about. So that is sailing through. Currently, there's no opposition. Cross your fingers, knock on wood. There is no opposition currently for that. because it's a very clean bill. There's nothing else to really talk about.
When you say it's sailing, it's moving through. Is it moving through just subcommittee, or is it actually made it through the assembly, and is it on the way to the Senate?
So it's on the floor. Basically, if things get to the floor of the assembly, they will get their vote and move forward into at this point in the year, being that we're towards the end of May. Essentially, if it has gotten to the floor of their respective house, it will either be something that has very minimal conversation about it, or it'll be a part of a consent agenda where they just pass it through. And I was actually watching the assembly, the session this morning, because they just came back and they had 60 something bills on the consent agenda. And essentially what they do is they say, here's the 60 bills that we've already have been on the floor. You're consenting that you're passing them through. Vote on all 60 bills right now.
At once.
And it's because they've already gone through all their committees. They've already been read in front of the houses. They're literally just there to say, pass it on to the Senate. And so it was funny because I was sitting there watching, and it's Chris Ward, who's here in San Diego. And I felt bad because I'm watching this and I'm just laughing because the clerk is reading out the bill number and Chris Ward has to say I-69 no 0, and then they read out the next bill number, I-69 no 0, I-69 no 0. And literally it's like 60, he says that 60 plus times. And I'm like, these are our elected officials that we're putting in a position where they just are literally repeating the same thing, 60 plus times in a row.
So that they can have it in the official record.
Yeah, so it can be in the official record and everything gets recorded, but it's just so funny because we like to either trash these people or put them up on a pedestal. And at the end of the day, they still have to copy paste the same thing over and over again that we have to do in any job.
Sure.
And for them, they have to sit up there in front of a microphone and say, I-69, no 0, and over and over and over and over again.
So the hope is that, or did 976, did the Ting bill make it through there, or is it about to be on the consent?
It's going to be on the consent agenda moving forward. Basically, from as of right now, anything that's on the floor is essentially moving forward. We're at that time where if a bill is still in committee, it's likely to be put on suspense, which means it's going to be there until it's basically going to be left behind. And this is where the Appropriations Committee, which met directly after that assembly general session, the Appropriations Committee sat there and had to go through 700 bills. And they are things that they've already kind of worked. Everything's already been worked out. Everything is labeled currently as on suspense, but they were coming back to say it was the first session back and they were going through all 700 bills and they'd already made decisions on all 700 bills. And the entirety of the session was the chair sitting there saying, AB, whatever from whoever dealing with this passes or remains in committee. And it's a really boring thing to sit there and watch. But as you sit there and watch, it's like it almost becomes like a drinking game where I hope they're drinking because the fact that he had to go through 700 bills in a period of 2 hours and say which ones are moving forward and which ones aren't. I literally had them up on my screen, so I knew, because they were doing it alphabetically by the author. And I was like, all right, well, they just got through Grayson's AB 434. I'll come back in like 20 minutes and see where they're at on Ting's AB 932. So it's ridiculous.
It's how the sausage is getting made.
Yeah, and it's not a pretty not pretty in any circumstance, but it's definitely
no, it's not. And as an aside, I was at a coffee community meeting with Carolyn Menjivar. She's a senator that represents a section of Burbank, and she was telling me the numbers that each assembly member and senator are allowed to, the bills that they're allowed to do each year, and it is a ridiculous number.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking to myself, why would you want to submit that many things? I guess throwing it against the wall to see what sticks, maybe. I don't know, but it was really fascinating.
You have to remember that the portion that we deal with is such a tiny little sector of government as a whole. And we like to sit here and be like, hey, these are the most important bills to look for this year. But every one of those senators and assembly members have people from every different community and every different sector that have their own bills. And you can't be a assembly member or a senator and only deal with housing or only deal with one thing, because that doesn't work.
No, you have to represent your constituents.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you'll see the same author with bills about ADUs, bills about, the justice system, bills about, and it goes on and on. And I would say that it's something that, especially in the industry, we don't really remember as much, because we're like, hey, these are really important. They're like, yeah, well, I'm also trying to make sure people don't get killed.
Yeah, traffic and safety. I think that's important. So Ting is looking good for the owner occupancy to sunset in 2025.
To not sunset in 2025.
To not sunset, so that it will become permanent, that there will not be an owner occupancy requirement for an ADU and a primary.
So, yes. So it's looking good that the sunset will not happen, which means that there will not be owner occupancy requirements in the state moving forward, period.
And that would be wonderful. Let's talk about 1033. Same author, Ting.
All right. 1033 is a bill that allows California and local agencies to create ordinances that would allow for separate conveyance of ADUs as condos at the choice of the local agency. If you have seen any of the opposition on this, you'll most likely have seen things that says that this is the downfall for all civilization in California. Because people are going to sell ADUs that are not permitted and not safe. And yeah, that's not true. The whole idea behind the bill is that currently there is a prohibition in state law that says ADUs cannot be separately conveyed. And except if it is a nonprofit developer, a lot of like really nuanced things. We called it the Habitat bill when it initially went through, because it provided the space for Habitat for Humanity to create for sale ADUs on properties they own. At the end of the day, it means that pretty much no ADUs are being sold separately, because nonprofit developers don't exist in the way that they aren't building ADUs, at least.
Or they're not doing it in any meaningful number.
Yes. So the whole idea behind ADUs, and this is something going back several years, is that ADUs provide an opportunity for access to neighborhoods, access to housing that otherwise would not be available for the people that are now able to access those ADUs. Originally that was rentals. Originally that was, and we look at things like, getting into why San Diego is so great. Now, we don't need to go down that road, but this whole bonus program has created opportunities for deed restricted affordable housing in neighborhoods that have historically been some of the most expensive neighborhoods in San Diego that would never be available to renters to access housing in those neighborhoods. And so we talk about when homeowners talk about how great their schools and parks and neighborhoods are. That's wonderful, but that only is wonderful if people can access that neighborhood and access those schools and access the ability to live in those neighborhoods. So ADUs in general have opened up that opportunity to some extent. Things like San Diego bonus program have opened up that opportunity in a larger sense for rentals. But when we talk about home ownership, ADUs have done very little to reduce the threshold to get into home ownership.
Well, let's talk about that, because then when I first heard about AB 1033 to create the separate conveyance, and I was like, okay, how are they going to do it? And then I think I heard in a subsequent conversation that it was going to go through the quote unquote condo thing. So you now create this, so you can have real property, but you don't own the land that it's on, but you may have an interest in the property itself. And so
let's take a step back and understand what home ownership in general is.
Before you answer that, I'm trying to get into how does that pull into a lender? How is a lender going to look at it to be able to finance it? As an example, let's use it where a mom and dad, a parent have the primary, and they're like, okay, we can maybe build this ADU for you, but then we want you to buy it. We want you to have home ownership and have an interest in it to their kids.
So let's say there's a couple different ways this can work. It all centers around the fact that this is not intended to be a subdivision like SB 9. This is intended to be a condoization of a property, which is fairly common across California currently. There are processes to condo map a property. I've worked on a number down here in San Diego a long time ago. And essentially the theory behind it is like you have to so let's just say like I've got an ADU, even let's say a converted or attached ADU. I have 2 units. I want to sell one off. One retains the primary interest in the land. The other one has access and easement rights and owns their unit. You essentially have to create, the fire barrier, the firewall to separate the units. You don't have to then bring everything up to current code for today. And this, I'm not talking about ADU specific, I'm talking about like typical condo mapping to attached units, like a duplex. You're essentially bringing it up to health and safety code for today, and you are creating that fire separation, and then you are establishing who has what rights to the property. And it's in a lot of ways, it's like an HOA, and you typically have the same kind of structure as far as who is responsible for what. And those are all written into the documents. But when we talk about the difference between that and say, SB9 lot split, it's a much simpler process to condo map something than it is to do an SB9 lot split with the mapping standards and everything else.
Right, but with an SB9 lot split, you're going to have a very clear delineation on that, Jared. You're not going to have.
Well, let me ask you this:
an easement or something.
if I'm buying a townhouse in a development, I don't own the land. If I'm buying a condo in a high rise, I don't own the land. It's very clearly delineated in the agreement what I own versus what is owned by the either organization or the seller in this case. And in any case, it's the seller, but you have someone else owns this portion and I own my unit. And so essentially what we're saying is that we are extending that opportunity to ADUs to be treated in the same way that any other condo is.
Okay, let me push back on that just a little bit, because your illustration is that you have a townhouse. A townhouse is going to be in a neighborhood that typically has other townhouses. This may not be by itself, but it could be. Saying it's a condo in a high rise where there's a bunch of them. Like in La Mesa, which you're familiar with, right on Lake Murray. I had a condo in that sort of developments right there. You didn't own the land, but you understood it. That they had an HOA. They had a homeowners association that helped govern. They had a homeowners association that helped gather and the money that they needed to have in their reserves that they're required to by state code, the state law, to be able to maintain the infrastructure. So you're creating this type of a relationship that is now going to be incumbent upon the two parties, the primary homeowner and then the condo homeowner, to be in agreement of what their mutual responsibilities are. And you're creating a mutual agreement between both parties, where if you do an SB9, a lot split, this is mine.
Yeah,
that's yours.
And that's exactly what I'm getting at. This is not an SB9 lot split.
Right.
And it's not intended to be. It's intended to be a home ownership opportunity, just like a condo or a townhouse is. The whole idea is it's centered around, like, that doesn't matter if one entity owns the land and you own your unit.
I'm with you.
What's the other option?
Well, I don't see,
like for condos. What I'm getting at is, in any case, one entity owns the land and you own your space, regardless of, and I get that, like, in a large condo association, you have a bunch of different, like, you have those voting mechanisms, all of that kind of stuff.
Yes.
All of that still has to be done in a condo map. You still have to create the mechanisms for all of that. It's not like,
and that's my point.
I own the land, I'm going to tell you what to do.
And I think
everything is laid out as a contractual agreement in a way that is much safer than what we currently have.
Well, we don't have anything currently, except if you wanted to say SB9. There's nothing that exists.
We have rentals.
Yes, you have. So now you have this home ownership.
So now that same unit that I would be renting, I now have the opportunity to have a title on, with my title insurance, my everything that comes along with that.
All the benefits of home ownership. Yes, I see that.
Yes. So what I think you're getting at is that there's an inherent risk when one entity owns the house and land and you own the unit.
Just the unit. You might have your easements for access. Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is the mechanisms in place for that homeowner of the ADU has 10 times the protections that a current renter does in an ADU.
No, and I'm not arguing that. I'm arguing the fact that I don't see how this is going to be meaningful in any way beyond a very, very small number of potential interested users, which it's, mom or dad own the primary and the land, and they're going to try to have something done for their kid. Or
I don't see that at all. And I think what we're,
you don't see that scenario, or you don't see that it's going to be limited.
I don't see that's going to be limited to that.
Okay, then let's kind of work this one out, because I love this topic. You know it. I don't know it as much, but I want to know it. So thank you for the time on this. What is the illustration where how can we get additional traction with an ADU that's going to be sold, conveyed separately? Because part of me of what's thinking in my mind as my developer background is I'm going to go to that homeowner. I'm going to say, hey, you own that property. I have some cash. I'm going to build that ADU, and then I'm going to sell that ADU to somebody else, because you as a homeowner have the land. I'm going to pay you for some interest of that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you some cash. Let's say a couple $100,000, because I'm going to build the ADU, and then I'm going to sell the ADU because it's in Burbank for $500,000.
Sure.
That would work.
Okay.
So that's where I think you might, as a developer, try to see or a provider of housing is looking at the metrics to see how you could do that, and what is the incentive? What is the incentive to a homeowner to either do it for themselves, to be able to sell that off and to realize cash?
Let's look at it this way. Currently, if I build an ADU, my only way to get out of that. So let's say let's take a terrible example of a homeowner that builds an ADU. They can only rent it out for, the rental amount maybe covers their expenses based off of where interest rates and everything else are at these days. And so they want to get out of that situation. Instead of having to sell their home, they could sell that ADU to help cover those costs in a way that would be much different than the monthly rental income.
Right. No,
Yes.
and I see the scenario. What I'm wondering and questioning is the appeal. Who's going to want to
appeal to whom?
A homeowner.
A homeowner that wants to stay in their house and wants to monetize an ADU they've already either built, or wants to monetize a piece of their land that they, because I think you're comparing it to SB9. This is not SB9.
No, I'm not.
You and I both know, SB9 does not really work in the situation currently.
No,
and
it's
so
getting
what
very
this
little
is,
traction, and that's why I'm correlating SB9 to Assembly Bill 1033 is going to be the broad market adoption.
Let's talk about why SB9 doesn't work.
Please.
Why doesn't SB9 work?
It's too expensive.
Exactly.
You need
$1.5
million to do it.
Well, yes. But remember, this is an ADU that you've built that you're now going to condo map. You aren't going to be required to separate off utilities. You're not going to be required, because everything is set up as easements, as communal property. In the case of things like utilities and everything there. So you end up getting these situations where this is going to be way faster, way easier to get done, because it's not an SB9 lot split, is a condo map. And I would say let's pause there, because
yes,
I don't know how much experience you've had with condo mapping as opposed to lot splitting. And those are different in a number of ways. And so what I would say is let's move on to the rest of the
and I got a lot of it. So yes, and thank you, because my last question, and I agree, is that how is 1033 doing so far?
It's doing well. So let's take a step back, and I'm just going to ask this question to you, David, and you may know the answer already. But if I was going to tell you that there was an type of opponent that is going to be the most outspoken and the biggest kind of person in the way of this, who would you think that was?
The California Association of Realtors,
Why?
because they are the biggest lobbying pack organization in the state.
Okay, so why would a association of people that get to sell things be against getting to sell more things?
In their view, my reaction to that would be they don't see the overall value, and they see that as diluting the single family residential fabric of their community.
So I wish that was the case. Their primary objections are that these are going to be not permitted, they're not going to be safe, and they're going to be sold as new construction, and that they are not new construction.
So that's they're making the jump in assumptions that an existing conversion of an older or illegally permit built ADU is going to be sold and conveyed.
Okay, yes. But
all right, I see that.
Here's the issue. What are they selling now?
Well, they are selling condos, and they are selling single family residential,
When have the majority of those single family homes been built?
In Burbank, it's the 1930s.
Okay. So what you're saying to me, what they're saying is that we're concerned that this ADU that was built last year or 10 years ago or 20 years ago is too unsafe to sell. But and let's make sure that still has to be permitted. It's not like it can just
and
be
inspected.
This. Yes. So that's more unsafe to sell than a home built in the 30s.
Yeah, I completely understand your point, and I have heard, because I do go to our local association.
I know you do
regularly, and I've heard those things. Hey, and thank you for the deep dive on 1033.
There's a lot of crap that's getting thrown against the wall to see what sticks.
That's what they're doing, is what I hear you saying.
Yes. Hold on, David. Because I can't hear you all of a sudden. And we have that Q&A there. If you guys can let me know if you can't hear me, or let us know if David or me. I hear David can hear me. I don't think I can hear David.
Okay, testing.
I can hear you now.
My cord was a little pulled out. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Apologize about that technical glitch. So we're going to go on to 1332.
1332. Really? That's the one that you choose to go to next?
Why not?
So, 1332. Bill that I did not want to see go forward this year. Not that I don't think there's merit in what it's doing, but we want to make sure that we get the owner occupancy taken care of, and we want to make sure that we get the separate conveyance taken care of before we try to throw together a statewide ADU, pre-approved ADU program, which is what 1332 does. 1332 is a bill by Juan Carrillo in Victorville, and we've had, again, this is something that's already on the assembly floor, so it's going to be moving forward. Happy that it's moving forward in the way that it is moving forward, because it has been written in a way where, as David and I have talked about in the past, it doesn't matter if you have a pre-approved ADU program, if you don't have a mechanism for repeatability. Because I can give you the worst ADU possible as a pre-approved ADU, and your city can say that they have a pre-approved ADU program that no one will ever use. So
Amen.
this bill was designed initially, the initial wording was that cities needed to create a pre-approved plan program with 6 units and a 2-bedroom and a 1-bedroom and whatever. We were able to get it reworded so that it says that cities have to have a pre-approved program that is open for applicants to put units in. That it remains open, it's not a closed program, and that it becomes it's the kind of market-driven solution that we've talked about in the past, David.
What? Why wouldn't you like that? That sounds perfect.
No, that is okay. That's okay. That's the, like, if you're gonna do this pre-approved plan program, that's the way to do it. But as we've talked about, it's all about repeatability.
Scalability.
No, repeatability. Scalability favors the people that have the money to go through the pre-approved program in the beginning and get all their units pre-approved, and then they can dominate those programs, right? So if you can go through, David, and throw 15 units through, and I have you've got your team of 35 people over there with you, that I'm doing this by myself, and I can get 1 unit through. Well, now you have a huge advantage in the marketplace from the city's perspective of how they are saying they have a pre-approved plan program with 16 units in it, and 15 are from you and 1 is from me. But I'm the one that lives in the neighborhood, and you're the outsider from LA that's out there that's just, shoving your units through the program. So the bigger issue is repeatability, meaning if I'm doing stuff for homeowners in that jurisdiction left and right.
I know where you're going for, which is what I proposed to the city of Burbank.
So you don't have to propose to the city of Burbank, because the state, that AB 1332 says that any plan that's been utilized in that jurisdiction in the current code cycle has the same level of expediting as any unit that is gone through the pre-approved plan program.
Home run! So that would mean my 734 square foot ADU would be part of the pre-approved process, unless it goes from, maybe it was 2 years ago that I got it submitted, or maybe it was from the time that I got C of O.
So yes, anything in the current code cycle, just like a pre-approved plan, you still have to update it every code cycle, right? If you have previously permitted it in that jurisdiction, it gets the same level of expediting as something that's gone through the pre-approval process. So it benefits
all right. Hold on. Time
the
out.
local designers just as much as it benefits the big guys that want to throw all their stuff into every jurisdiction.
Well, I think that this sounds fabulous, because then I could go up to the director of planning with the city of Burbank and kind of go, hey, what I sat down in front of you. I said, why not have plans that have gone through the system? They've already been scrutinized by your department, and why not allow them, if the builder wants to submit them for pre-approval by this, whatever.
So here's the point, David. I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk about all that kind of stuff, because I'm going to run to the bathroom
Go do
I'll
it.
be back in 2 minutes.
No, take your time. And I'm going to kind of
I know you can fill the time. I believe in you.
Go for it. So one of the things, everybody here, thank you very much for joining Jared and I as we kind of go down these rabbit holes of policy, and you can see that it is very complex. The part of 1332 that he and I kind of touched on is as we were brainstorming on how I can best make an argument to the city of Burbank for pre-approved plans. And he and I discussed, and it was kind of, through his initiative, was to say, why not ask people, the city, to say, if you've gotten something that has been approved already. So let's take my ADU that I can look at. Oh, hey, there it is. It's right there in my backyard. In Burbank, approved, final. Why can't I take that floor plan and then just say, okay, I want to put this into your pre-approved ADU program? Well, the director said, no, we're just going to take the plans from the city of Los Angeles, which more than half of them are ridiculous. One of them is a 16-sided star that it probably cost you $500,000 to $750,000 to build it. Probably none of them have been built. I'd say the majority of the plans that the city of Burbank adopted are not going to be built. The city of Burbank is a small jurisdiction, and they don't have the number of employees, let's say, like the San Jose has. San Jose has a ridiculously amazing program for processing plans that have already been submitted and reviewed. I interviewed Tiffany Garcia on one of our past webinars. You should watch it. It is fabulous because we had her architect on, and it was like 2 weeks from the time that the architect submitted the plans. And then after that 2 week, they had a meeting. And at that meeting, they asked a couple questions. The various departments signed off on it because they were all there. And then it was probably about 3 hours after that meeting. It was just the time it took to print out all the documents that Tiffany had her plans. She had her building permit. Everything was approved. So San Jose, again, much larger jurisdiction, one of the largest cities in California, was able to kind of get this ADU just permitted and ready to go super fast with a pre-approved plan with a local architect.
And with AB 1332, they will cut that time down from normal time frame of 60 days down to 30 days max.
And see, that's the part where I'm happy to see that the state legislative activities and the people that are advocating for common sense legislation, not lobbyists, are doing a lot of good work.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense. Wonderful. Let's move on to AB 434.
Yes. So this is one of those that was on suspense in the appropriations as of this morning, and part of the 700 bills that the chair dutifully read through and said that it was passed onto the full House. And this is probably the most important bill out of any of the ones we've talked about so far. The least controversial from a standpoint of opposition that knows that it's there. AB 434. So let's back up and talk about what HCD's role is right now.
Oh, yeah.
HCD currently has the enforcement mechanism when a city passes an ordinance for ADUs to comply with state law. They have the ability to say, yes, that meets state law. No, it does not. If they say it doesn't meet state law and city doesn't change it, then they can pass it on to the attorney general and go down the path of enforcement that they have. The problem is that 99% of the issues that we run into in the field as professionals have nothing to do with the actual ordinance. They have everything to do with other local policies or regulations, or they have to do with the application of that ordinance, or they have to do with any number of other things, 60 days, all of that. Well, at the end of the day, the only enforcement currently that HCD has, the only mechanism is to review an ordinance and comment on it. And then potentially forward those rules on to the DOJ to say, take care of this.
But that's only if the jurisdiction or the department
Even sends, yeah.
respond.
So even if the jurisdiction even sends the ordinance to HCD is the first question.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we do in the field is what ends up requiring them to do that, because those jurisdictions are not sending them in their own free will, but only after we are complaining about something, and then they have to send it over to HCD.
Yeah,
So,
because they've been engaged by HCD.
Yes, because right now they are required by state law to provide that ordinance within 60 days of passage, but there's no penalty if they don't do that. So cities just wait till HCD reaches out to them, and then they send their ordinance over it upon request. So AB 434 changes what HCD can enforce. So currently they can only enforce a past ordinance. AB 434 would allow them to enforce all of ADU law. Meaning, and this is a great example of this, is one of the biggest things that cities will do over the course of a permit that ends up getting denied or delayed is they're utilizing things from their grading ordinance or things from their, right-of-way rules and regulations that say that if it's the valuation is over X, now you have to do right-of-way upgrades. And state law very clearly says that no other local policy, ordinance, or regulation can be utilized to delay or deny a building permit for an ADU. Well, that's all well and good, but if I am complaining to HCD that the city is utilizing another policy to deny my building permit, then HCD is going to come back and say, I'd love to help you, but we only have the ability to enforce the actual ordinance. So they have the ability to enforce the rules within that written document, but they don't have the ability currently to enforce the application of those rules or application of anything else when it comes to ADUs.
Well, couldn't you couldn't they, HCD, and this is what I understand that they're currently allowed to do, that if they're saying that and they're denying a permit because of something extraneous or unrelated, the HCD can say, you are denying this for something that's, extraneous or unrelated, and you should not do that. And my understanding, that is the extent that of their powers.
Yeah, that's their only mechanism currently, is actually really operating outside of their ability within law. Like currently, they should not be responding back to cities saying, hey, this permit should be pushed, like you're denying this based off of other policies. HCD really should be saying, we've reviewed their ordinance and their ordinance is compliant. They are doing us a solid, essentially, just to say, hey, by the way, it looks like you're not following state law. But that's why they're saying you should do this, rather than saying you're breaking state law and we're referring you to the DOJ.
Which is 434.
So 434 gives them the ability, whenever a city is not following all of the extraneous portions in ADU law, they can currently they can enforce a written document, whether that written document complies. Now they'll be able to enforce whether that city is following the written document and everything else in state law.
Do the people that are arguing this, do they feel that will make a substantive change to allow that? if it passes?
So currently it's just, this is the one that's sailing through with no one is even aware of how great this is or how much of this is needed.
So does it create an additional layer of I don't want to say bureaucracy, but does it create the need for additional staff and people that's going to be, and has it made it through budget or appropriations? Because they're going to look at it and say, we need
So
X number of people.
it made it through appropriations today. That was one of those 700 that got passed back to the floor.
Do you have any idea of what they assigned to it?
No, so essentially what they in these cases, cities are obviously able to are you talking about budget wise what they assigned to the
Budget wise, what did the author of the bill anticipate would be the monetary obligation that HCD would then have to bear if they were to then have additional enforcement mechanisms? Because you're going from saying,
I know what you're saying. And hold on. So basically what they did is they included this in the sections of codes that it's in the housing element law. So it doesn't actually they already have the mechanisms within the housing element law to refer them to attorney generals for not having compliant housing elements.
So, and so with my query is they don't necessarily need to have the additional.
They don't need anybody else. They don't need any more money.
If you're not, as what they're doing now is saying that you're not compliant and you should be compliant. Now they're going to go from you should do it to hi, we're going to go to the attorney general.
Yeah, because they're already responsible for reviewing the housing element.
Got it.
And the housing element includes their local zoning. So I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah.
We're on the downhill slide to the end of this, hour and a half, 90-minute thing. And there's some some juicy stuff that I want to kind of jump into.
All right.
Before we do, we did have a question in the Q&A. It was from Kim. Kim, thank you very much for that question. Can I do a garage conversion and a basement conversion without a permanent owner occupancy in San Diego unincorporated?
So that's San Diego County. The answer is no, you cannot do so. The only way you get two conversions is if one is a JADU and that JADU requires owner occupancy.
Let's see. So let me ask, garage conversion and basement conversion. Basement is typically not conditioned space.
So hold on. How do I get my 3 additional units, David?
What we talked about it. Converting existing, adding
to what? To what? No, hold on. Converting existing to what?
An ADU.
Converting existing to the second way you convert existing is how?
To an ADU.
Okay, I'll let you walk through it. So, unit 1, converting existing to an ADU. Right?
Yes.
Unit 2.
Well, let's say converting existing detached garage.
And converting existing anything to an ADU.
ADU.
Right?
1. Then
Number
you can
2.
add a detached ADU. New construction is 2.
3.
And then is under the existing roof line, existing square footage is a J.
Yes. So the only way that you can do 2 conversions
is one's a J and one's an A.
Exactly. Which means you have owner occupancy.
Okay. Kim, sorry about as we kind of dove into that one a little bit wonky, but I hope that answered your question. You can always kind of reach out.
And I would love to tell you that it mattered that it was conditioned space, but it doesn't matter because the only way to get 2 conversions is if one of them is a J.
Got it. Thank you for that.
Requires owner occupancy.
So one of the things that I kind of get down to a little bit more common things that I get a lot of questions on is, or I kind of make it curious. And I know we touched on this before the beginning of the webinar, is valuations of ADUs. I think that, as policymakers and advocates of building more housing run into issues, and they're asking people such as ourselves, where are we running into some roadblocks? Well, the part I think is financing, because the number one source of building ADUs right now is cash. Number two, it's a home equity line of credit. That's how you're building your ADU. Far, far removed are construction loans or 401k withdrawals or anything
Organ
else.
donation.
Is very far away, and one of the impediments, in my opinion, is that being able to get a loan. But so being able to kind of say, okay, I'm going to go build this new structure. And because this new structure, let's just kind of use my ADU, it's detached, 734 square feet, brand new construction. Even though it's a panel kit, it complies with the CBC and Title 24. It is ridiculously overbuilt if you compare it to my 1930s built primary.
Right?
It is ridiculously overbuilt. But my primary, built in the 1930s, has a per square foot value of close to $900 a square foot. And that ADU is being valued, because it's an accessory, of about 30% the value. So because it has 30% of the value, and I'm not renting it out, if my father-in-law is living into it, I don't have a metric to be able to say it should be valued anything differently. So we get into...
So what you're saying is, if there was a mechanism by which it could be valued as a for sale unit, that might actually help you. Right? I was waiting for this question after everything we talked about, because I was like, oh man, he's gonna walk right into this.
I did walk right into it, but you still, but I would say the converse also applies, because you're building an ADU and you're then, saying, oh, I want to section it off to be able to sell it as a condo. It's like, okay, how are we going to value it? Because it's still built as an accessory dwelling unit under that code.
Okay, so let me this was something that actually got brought up in an interview we did with the LA Times yesterday. We talked
I'm glad
about,
I'm topical.
You are. You're a day behind LA Times, so that's a good thing. They haven't written about it yet, so you haven't even cheated. No, so let's take it this way. If I'm going to build and this is something that was this was not from that interview. This was actually last night with Raphael at our mixer. One of the things that got brought up on the floor about for this bill specifically was that exact, well, it's built as accessory, so how are you going to determine the whole valuation thing? It keeps coming up. So if I have a farm that is 100 acres, and I decide to do a subdivision there, the existing use is a farm. If I go for financing on that, they're not going to say, oh, sorry, we don't provide financing for farms, because that's not what I'm asking them to finance. I'm asking them to finance a subdivision. The existing use and the proposed use are different. So if I have an existing ADU and I'm proposing to make it a condo, is the same as I have an existing farm that I'm proposing to make a subdivision.
All right, I understand.
It's about the proposed use and the rules that go along with that.
Okay, but why? I guess why the federal government, I know that Casita is, if you're advocating in your capacity, working for Casita on a state level, when and how is it going to be made to the federal level to be able to not have to go through the machinations to turn it into a condo?
So let's be real clear on this. The whole condo mapping ADU issue is not an issue at the federal level for financing.
No, it wouldn't be, because it would then be identified as a condo. But my
Yes.
issue is that for the person, myself is as an example, I built an ADU. If I
Yes.
wanted to refinance my house and property, the only value that that ADU would be given is 30% of the primary's existing.
Yes,
And that's a problem.
it is.
Go fix it.
We're working on that too. How many things do I have to fix for you in a week, David? You don't pay a casita membership that high that you can demand those kinds of requests.
No,
But this is a great opportunity to sit here and say, this is why you support the work that we do here at Casita Coalition. And this is why you can go to casitacoalition.org/join and provide us with the funding necessary for us to keep working on these things.
and I will
And
add on to
my new pitch, David, and I want to be clear about this. My new pitch, because times are tough right now. You don't want them to get tougher, right?
no.
See, David, you haven't really worked in an environment where I was in the market as a competitor. And I really don't think you want to work in an environment where I'm in the market as a competitor.
I love it because,
So the more that you
all
donate to
shifts.
Casita, it keeps me working for you rather than against you, David.
No, I'm not afraid of competition, never have, never will be, because I think you learn something from it. It tests your mettle. And I think it's a brilliant thing. The point that I wanted to kind of bring up is that it's just to echo, is that the Casita Coalition is doing some amazing work. And I hope that if there's any industry professional that's on this or listening to this, watching it in the future, that if you're not a member of the Casita and you want to help further policies that are good, strong, common sense policies that are going to help with accessory dwelling units and housing, being a member of the Casita Coalition is one of the greatest things you can do. Another wonderful benefit is the roundtable. And the roundtables I get a lot of fun out of, because you have industry professionals and you really kind of share what your real world, real time issues are with your jurisdictions and your permitting issues. And if you're dealing with the utility or whatnot, and you try to work around it. Also, there's ways to be able to pull on other experts to say, hey, I need to know X, and you can do it that way.
And what I will say, so that's a great point. I will say there's probably some people in watching now or in the future that think that they're members or are, friends of Casita members. And I know that there's been, people that thought that they were involved but they haven't been getting the invites to these kinds of things that we're talking about. And it's because those are reserved for our business members. So if you're a Friends of Casita member, we definitely appreciate that you're a friend of ours, but you're not getting the most out of your membership. And that's the difference between giving $100 a year versus.
And you'll be able to find that out at where?
Well, casitacoalition.org/join. And if you have questions, you can email me at jared@casitacoalition.org.
Thank you. We do have, I'm going to go on to another topic here, but before we do, Ismail, thank you very much for your question. And it is, what happens if you make the attached ADU and a JADU, but then move out, let's say a year after completion, but you already gave the JADU its own kitchen and everything, makes it a standalone unit?
Well, just because you move out doesn't remove the deed restriction on owner occupancy. And what I will say is that this is something that we get into where technically a city can require you to remove that kitchen, remove that unit, revert it back, because again, these are conversions, so it was something before, and they can require you to revert it. I'm not going to get into all of the loopholes to get around the state law, or things that are yeah, you could probably do that, but again, it's all about how the state is going about creating units and how we can help do that moving forward.
Yeah, and it's also your risk tolerance, I would say too. And adding on to what Jared said, if you're going to do that and you're signing a covenant that says you are going to be compliant, and so you just have to understand what the risks are, which is like what Jared said. They might make you change something.
Or if you're renting that out, you're renting everything out, and something happens on site. Now you have tenants that, when you have one illegal unit that, that can create issues across all of them.
Very big, and I'm huge on that. And thank you for mentioning that. Is like if you're renting it out and there's a dispute and there's legal action, there's a lawsuit, the attorneys are going to be able to find that very, very quickly. So it's just something to be very mindful of. What Jared also alluded to is that there are ways, if you're a different sort of an entity, I think like a nonprofit, there are ways you can do some things with JADUs, but that's a completely different conversation. We have just a couple more minutes, and I want to kind of touch on something that I have not brought up with you before, but I really want to try to get your perspective on that. And it is the different sort of types of, because there's always this thing of how do we take care of the missing middle? How do we take care of additional housing? How do we take advantage of getting more housing out on the ground? And as I've been doing these webinars and talking to a lot of different people, I've come to this realization that there's really a big difference between if you are an architect, designer, general contractor, and you're working in this one sort of segment of the market. And then if you go over to a manufactured factory built modular representative, that is a completely different segment of the market for ADUs. I'm not going to get into the minutia of the differences between the terminologies, but if you just take designer
Tile
architect,
24 versus tile 25.
Bingo. And those are
How did I know you were gonna go there?
It's a different way at it. It's a different way to look at it, because now I've seen that these two are not very close together and they're very separated. And there is, in my opinion, but would you share the perspective or your perspective of how we could kind of get and bridge the gap between the two? So if, example, you went and looked at a property, or you were talking to somebody who looked at a property, said, I can't, the best thing for them is a manufactured home, but I don't sell manufactured homes, so I'm not going to recommend it. I got him thinking.
Are you asking me what I would say, or
To
like
bridge the gap? It could, because do you see that there are two different silos and two different sort of very unique, separate, sort of segments of the industry?
I don't see that there are two separate silos. I see that there's a multitude of different types of housing that can be accessed by, when we talk about missing middle, we talk about like bridging the gap. I think the bigger conversation for me, and I know this is not how you want me to answer this, David.
I don't have any preference. That's why I enjoy our conversation. The
question for me is around like the manufactured tile 25 versus tile 24 building code. To me, is much closer siloed together than some of the other really extraneous things that are out there, and things that we get asked about all the time, which is everything from, tiny homes on wheels, which I will say there's a lot of movement on getting the ICC to create an entire section for small housing that is different than what we have currently in our codes, that will impact the cost all the way down to, and this is something that like I don't talk about very often, but the idea around, and it kind of gets to tiny homes on wheels, but the idea that the ability to dwell, it has been held for a very long time in real property versus personal property.
Chattel.
So we have a housing crisis, we have a need for housing. And from the perspective of at the far end of site built custom, going down, I'm saying going down the list of like, as we start making things, as things become more affordable, we have, site built custom, we
Well,
have
talk about how
modular
they
and
talk about how they
manufactured.
get more affordable, because you have to remove the health and safety code requirements and energy requirements that are currently in CBC and Title 24.
And so what I'm getting at is like, if we're just looking at a place to sleep,
Right.
which, and
It'd be a cardboard
I know
box.
that that's not what we're necessarily talking about right here, David. But when we talk about and this is what I feel, I totally hear where you're coming from, and I get that those two silos, but to me, there's two more silos before we get to a place where we are talking about no longer, like, we're talking about people sleeping on the streets. And so to me, the two silos are actually the division between real property and personal property, which is division between tiny homes on wheels, cars, RVs, etc., and manufactured versus site built.
Okay, let me dive in just a minute, because we only
And
have
I know that's not what you were looking for in this conversation.
No, actually, it is exactly what I was hoping you do, because you shared your perspective of how you see it, and that's very important for the conversation, because it's conversations like this that can help shape the policy for the state and shape the policy as leading California. Because the chattel component, as you're identifying with personal property with tiny homes on wheels, a manufactured home built to the HUD code is still chattel until it's attached with a permanent foundation. And its standards are significantly different. A manufactured home, which is still chattel until it's attached, is a lot different than a tiny home, which is chattel always. You can say you put a permanent foundation under it, but it's not to the same code. And I understand
that's where David, what I'm almost getting at is that, like, the silo between, like, the division between manufactured and stick built on site, from a standpoint of like the options that I'm going to give to a homeowner are not that, I mean, they're different, yes, but I'm also looking at from the standpoint of the policy side of we're constantly having this conversation, David, across the industry about the difference between Title 24 and Title 25.
Well, talk to me about that.
Well, talking about the valuation difference, the code difference, all the things that are different in both quality, code, valuation between those two, when those two are really only a piece of the overall housing picture. For when we talk about housing for all, as opposed to what a homeowner is going to put on their property. I'm talking about
So you're talking
where
about
I'm going to lay my head tonight.
Yeah, you're talking about multifamily. You're talking about temporary shelters. You're talking about what the state had today, with cabins or some sort of a structure that is very.
And so it all comes down to what what are we trying to do? Or in my mind, there's different objectives. Sorry for the car that's bumping their stereo outside the door. But there's different objectives across the spectrum. And for me, it's always been about making sure everyone has a place to call home.
And that's a more global, not global or national kind of perspective. And I appreciate that. Mine's a little different. Mine are ADUs, but it's focused on housing, typically focused with single family homeowners. So if you own a home and you're looking for an ADU, that's my lane.
Yeah.
The Casita Coalition is looking at a much broader sort of lane and policies that kind of
And David, that ADU has been my lane for the past 6-7 years, but it's always been from the frame of I want to make sure that everyone has a place to call home.
And I think that that's very, very important, particularly in this day and age when everything is just so expensive. It's expensive in San Diego, it's expensive in LA, it's expensive in San Francisco, it's expensive everywhere. Jared, I really do hope we can kind of continue this because the legislative season will be over and we'll have more things to talk about.
Yeah, I'm always good for another couple of these until you piss me off thoroughly, and then I'll just tell you that. So
I'm pushing.
I'm always here. I'm always around. I'm happy to have these conversations. So
Jared, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. Everybody who joined us on the conversation and submitted your questions, thank you for being a part of it. We really are looking forward to providing some information and insight on your ADU journey, whether you're a professional or a homeowner. I want you to welcome you to kind of join the ADU University. You can go to the aduuniversity.org and sign up. You can be on our newsletter. You can also subscribe to one of our subscription levels. And I do encourage you to kind of check that out. And it's free for the first 14 days. Everybody have a wonderful day. Jared, I do look forward to our next conversation and very good luck to you with all the legislation the Casita Coalition is behind.
Thank you very much and appreciate the time.
All right. Take care. Have a good day.
All right.
Bye-bye.